Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel. I'm back. It's been a while, but I'm finally behind the camera again talking about Warhammer the Old World. Now I've already filmed this video about 4 times and deleted it, so hopefully this time I can get through it and have something worth posting. So if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know that one of the things that I'm doing is building several fantasy armies for Warhammer the Old World, and I've also looked at using proxy plastic models from other manufacturers, but I haven't done anything like that for dwarves, and that was partly because I wasn't really a big fan of the GW plastic dwarves when they came out first time around, and I didn't really want to invest in those models if I was going to build myself a dwarf army for Warhammer the Old World. I've always had a soft spot for dwarves. And in fact, Bugman's Dwarf Rangers was the first Warhammer unit that I purchased, together with some of the second edition Goldfags Ogres. So I thought, if I'm going to start a dwarf army for Warhammer the Old World, then I want to start with the original metals that I owned as a teenager. And this included the unit of Bugman's Dwarf Rangers, which I've stripped and I'm in the process of restoring. It also included the original dwarf gyrocopter model that I've had since I was a teenager. And again, I'm in the process of rebasing and restoring this. I haven't bothered stripping this model. Instead, I'm just going to give it a quick zenithal prime with white and repaint it as it is. The final model that I had as a teenager was this Bugman's beer cart, which I'm in the process of building and gluing together. So this isn't how the final model will be assembled. The runner there at the top of the cart should actually be underneath. And Bugman is currently blue tacked to the cart. I didn't want to fully assemble the model before I paint it. And then that brings me on to this sculpt of a beer wagon, because of course I wanted to go large. And this is a long-term project, which has been decades in the making. But I finally got all the bits dusted off, cobbled together, made sure that everything fits, and that there is a team of 4 individual dwarf cart ponies there ready to pull this monstrosity across the battlefield. Now I've actually done some ladders for the back, and there's a crew on top. So I've got my own brewer there with his frothy pint, and then a passed out crewman lying on top of the barrel. So before I carry on with the dwarf wagon, I just wanted to take a quick look at a few items from my sculpting history. Here we've got a marauder dwarf that I had as a teenager, and this was one of the first models that I actually converted to sit on a horse that was sculpted by Dave from Museum Miniatures. I also did the same with this dwarf. And this is a model that I need to restore. And not only is it an early conversion of mine that I probably did when I was about 16 years old, it's also a very old paint job that's in need of some TLC. And I think this dwarf was originally part of the Up the Wall crew, which was some dwarves urinating into urinals. Sculpted and produced by Citadel Miniatures at a point in time when they were doing a lot of stuff that was very slapstick and jokey, probably not PC for today's market, but worth a fortune if you ever see it on eBay. So maybe converting that guy was a mistake, but there it is. So those early conversions that I did actually whet my appetite for sculpting dwarves. I don't know if you can see there this very upset berserker. That I think is a perisculpt, and that's a model that I converted to stand on top of some giant mushrooms that I sculpted probably 15-20 years ago. And I think it was probably 25 years ago that I sculpted and painted this dwarf wizard. This is a green stuff model. It never went into production. It's just a one-off, and it was something that I did just to see if I could sculpt. And it is one of the first miniatures that I sculpted round about the same time that I was sculpting the first of my giants. I've got several dwarves in my collection that I sculpted for the Battle Forge. Many of them are still available, but eventually I sculpted these guys. So my Imperial Dwarf Spearman and also some Dwarf Cavalry. The idea of which I can trace all the way back to when I was 16 years old and I converted this Marauder Dwarf to sit on that QT Models pony. I think out of all the Dwarf Cavalry that I did, I only managed to get one model painted. And this guy was painted about 10 years ago for a photo shoot, and then all my dwarves got put in a box and forgotten about. So in addition to these dwarves here that were painted by David Marks, and they featured in my Modelling and Painting Fantasy Figures book, I painted two of my dwarves, again for a photo shoot, to go along with some of the fantasy carts that I had at the time. One of which was a beer cart, but I no longer have an example of that model, so I'm building it again here. And this was my answer to the Bugman's cart at the time. And after putting together this cart for my dwarves, that's when I decided I wanted to sculpt something bigger, and I did actually start the beer wagon that I've got in front of me here. These spoked wheels, I commissioned these when I owned and ran the Battle Forge. These were sculpted for me by Dave from Museum Miniatures, who was extremely good at creating ordnance and wheels and things like that. And I began to sculpt the chassis for a fantasy wagon, and that then got put in a box and forgotten about for at least a decade, along with some of the horses and this barrel, which is a green stuff barrel sculpted around a scrunched up piece of aluminium tin foil. Shortly after I commissioned the spoke wheels to be done, I went ahead and sculpted some solid wheels because they were easier to create. And not only do they fit the old fantasy cart that I've got here in all its various forms, but they also fit the wagon. So now I'm going to clear off this modelling desk, and I'm going to try and set up a turntable so we can look at the wagon that I sculpted all those years ago and the various options that I put together for it. And this will hopefully be going into production through the Battle Forge in the next few weeks or months. I certainly can't wait to get hold of several of these so I can paint them up for my dwarf army, which I will be making out of my original collection of Bugman's Dwarf Rangers. Now I've mounted these onto 20mm bases because I want to be able to play 3rd edition Warhammer with these guys. And then I'll put them in a conversion tray for Warhammer the Old World. Goldfag's Ogres are on 40mm bases, so they're ready to go for 3rd edition Warhammer. And then when it comes to a larger dwarf army with Warhammer the Old World, I've got somewhere in the region of 50 or 60 of these dwarves to paint up, and probably 30 or 40 dwarf cavalry miniatures to paint up. These form part of my collection of models that are associated with my modelling book, so these will be packed away and kept safe. A few dwarfs that I have painted will be incorporated into my own Warhammer the Old World dwarf army. And this is one of the reasons why as yet I haven't done any kit bashing or scale comparison videos for plastic dwarves. I know there are a lot of companies out there who do a lot of cool models. I think Fireforge do some in their Forgotten World range. I think Oathmark probably do some. I know Mantic do dwarves. There are a lot of plastic dwarf models out there. It's just I've never moved away from all the original Citadel metals that I've owned since I was a teenager. So that's an ongoing project which has been reinvigorated now that I've found and dusted off my dwarf beer wagon. I've got several different backs for the wagon, so I'll go through those now, clear the rest of the dwarves away and just focus on the wagon for the remainder of this video. Okay, so I've tried to set this up so I can rotate it and do a complete 360. So what I've got here is the wagon chassis with the solid wheels. These two greens here are some fantasy horses that I sculpted, and they come with separate heads. They're not yet available because they never went into production. They spent some time in a box before being finished off. The idea was to sculpt two bodies that were very similar, different poses. So I don't know if you can see there, they're basically a mirror image. They're basically a mirror image of each other. And the heads are separate, currently blue tacked on, so that you could swap them around to get a little bit more variation if, for example, you had a team of 4 fantasy horses pulling this fantasy cart. When sculpting those horses, the inspiration was this fantasy horse from an earlier edition of Warhammer. I don't have many examples of this horse. This one had lost a tail, so I've sculpted a replacement. I've got 1 or 2 horses that come in Dogs of War sets, like the Galloper Gun, and I think Midas the Mean or whatever with his pay cart, although that has a different tail. I wanted something similar so that if I'm going to build up my own Bretonnian army or Empire army, or kit them out with a baggage train, then I would have horses that would fit in with the look and feel of those earlier GW and Citadel models. So that was the thinking behind these 2 horses. The first thing I wanted to show you is just some of the different options for the wagon loads. So this is the hay cart with the 2 fantasy horses and the solid wagon wheels. So I'll just swap out those and bring in the dwarf ponies. Hopefully I can squeeze those in because they take up a little bit more room. But if I just rotate that round, you can see how that might look as part of a baggage train for a dwarf army. Okay, so I've had to zoom out a tiny little bit now to get that covered wagon to fit. But hopefully that gives you a good idea of what that might look like. And if I bring in the covered cart that I did, and some of the dwarves that I sculpted, hopefully you can get some idea of the vision that I had when I was creating this model. Right, now I'm going to bring in the beer barrel and sit that on there. Right, so I've made another adjustment there, and hopefully you can see all that. We'll probably lose the horses as we spin round. but that is one version of the Dwarf beer wagon that I had in mind. I've just blue tacked the separate elements that I sculpted, one of which are the ladders at the back there. It's really tricky doing this. So I've got a different style of ladder there. That can go on the back. And if I take a little drunk dwarf off the top, I also sculpted a bung for the top of the beer barrel. I'm going to try and then blue tack these on as well. I don't know if I'll be able to. A bit crude, but I also did some tankards hanging up, which you could have on the front or the back of this, depending on where you put the ladders. I mean, theoretically, the ladders could go down the side if you want them on, or you don't have to have them on at all. So that is the Dwarf beer wagon with the solid wagon or cart wheels being pulled by the Dwarf ponies. Right, I'll just bring in my half-built Bugman's beer cart so that you can see scale-wise. This is the HGV of refreshments. So yeah, Bugman's beer cart if you've got a unit of Dwarf Rangers in 3rd edition Warhammer that you want to supply, or there's my Dwarf beer wagon if you've got a whole army that you want to supply. So there's that, and I'll just take a quick look now. Oh yeah, whilst we're here, I'll just chuck in some extra dwarves again, so you can get an idea for scale. Okay, so the painted dwarves are dwarves that I sculpted for the Battle Forge, and they are still available if you want to pick up some examples. And there we have it. So I'll remove the dwarf bits and pieces. So I'll take the dwarf bits off from there as well. I'll leave those other bits on for now. We'll remove the dwarf ponies. Put the fantasy horses back on, because of course there's always the possibility that you might have a Bretonnian army, and maybe they drink wine. Or an Empire army that drinks ale or beer. And you might want a cart like this for your own baggage train, with or without the ladders at the back. Like so. You can always remove the boards from the side as well, so it is just a barrel. And the other thing that you could do if you wanted to is have the bung at the bottom or the back end. So a very modular design, because of course one of the things I want to do is use this not just for my Dwarf army, but for my Bretonnians and my Empire armies as well. So very quickly now I'll change the wheels, and we can see how that looks. Right, so that's the flat wagon chassis there with nothing on it. And then we'll get the barrel back on there. So this is just the simple barrel with the spoked wagon wheels. It could be a water cart or a wine or a beer cart, as I said, for the Empire or the Kingdom of Bretonnia. Let's put the covered wagon on. Bit tricky this setup because everything's just sort of blue tacked together, but there we have the covered wagon with the spoked wheels, which again could be part of the baggage train for your Bretonnian army or your Empire army. And if you do have a lot of cavalry, one thing the horses will need is plenty of fodder. And so my guess is several hay carts or hay wagons would be in order. And there we have it. And just to finish off, there's the Dwarf beer cart again, this time with the spoked wheels. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please smash that like button. Please also subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. It's the best way you can help me grow the channel, and it's free. If you want to leave a comment, please do. I always like reading your comments, but please keep them kind and respectful. Hopefully it won't be too long before my next video. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon.